Okay, we should be live on YouTube.
Okay, it's 8:43 a.m. This is the Grand County Budget Advisory Board meeting for September 18th. Present is Chris Baird, Quinn Hall, Jalen Hawks, Mallory Nassau, Kevin Walker, Chris Kaufman. Let's see, I need to scroll down here. Zach Wachezek, Elaine Gisler, Gabriel Wojtek, and looks like about all. We started the meeting about 8:35, but forgot to stream to YouTube, and so just catching up here. We're in the middle of discussing projection methodology, and we previously approved the meeting schedule starting September 18th, every Friday, 8:30 to noon through October 30. All right, any further discussion on projection methodology? I agree with Chris Kaufman that our previous statistical analysis will work probably for a lot of, especially expense lines. Not all of them, obviously, but a lot of them. Part of the reason for doing revenue first is because it gives us an understanding of what resources we have to work with. And it's better to understand when you're budgeting expenses what resources you have to work with. And so let's see. I'm going to that end, I'm going to share a different screen real quick of some year-to-date revenue. Okay. So this is how I'm tracking revenues as they come in. In January, we were looking pretty normal with typical or maybe even higher than average growth in sales, use, and excise taxes. And then by February, we saw a pretty marked decrease. So January in total, we saw about 112% of 2019. Then February, we were already seeing the effects of COVID even before we established any public health orders. And we were down to about 85.5% in February versus 2019. Then March came, and we were about 52.25% of 2019. April was the worst month and clocked in about 27% versus 2019. Then May, even though we were still closed through May, it did pop back up 39%. And the last actuals we have are June. And again, remembering that our revenues trail by a couple months. And so we got June's payment in August, and so this is really the last complete month we have for actuals, and we came up to about 77% already of 2019 in total. The big outlier is the transient room tax. Everything is going to be in the high 80s through 90s, and then even the car rental tax in June exceeded 2019 by 12 to 13%, almost 14%. But TRT is well below all those at 63.5% roughly of 2019. I think that that's partly because some businesses rely pretty heavily on international visitation and bus tours. There are no bus tours going on at all right now. And so I think that has an effect on TRT, whereas our sales and use taxes, are getting picked up by drive markets, et cetera. And so,
Chris, this is Elaine. I might add on the bus tours, just for clarification, that last year through Arches, we had 1,400 bus tours coming in 2019. And of course, this year we have none. And the just the international Visa View revenue for 2019 from all international was $10 million, which this year we have virtually no revenue brought in.
Yeah, and so that's definitely having an effect. And then I think, Elaine, you sent me an article too where there's projection that we won't see the same level of international visitation across the U.S. As 2019, at 2019 levels until about 2024.
Mm-hmm.
So it's possible that, you know, our TRT recovery could be a lot slower than the rest of our sales taxes. Our sales tax, it wouldn't surprise me if when we get July's figures in that our sales taxes are going to exceed 2019 levels. But we'll see. It's hard to say, but I think that the TRT is likely not to hit 2019 levels this year. But it's hard to really, again, this is all highly speculative. We don't know what's going to happen, but these are the actuals, and they're already exceeding my projections below for July, August, September. I used these projections for our budget amendment, and so I think we're probably going to exceed my projections anyway for 2020, at least on the sales and use taxes. TRT is probably going to be a little bit more than I projected, but it's hard to say how quickly it's going to recover. But as time goes by.
This is Elaine. I do know that the commercial campgrounds that we have are all booked through the end of October. So,
Yeah.
So which is a good sign. The hotels, I haven't gotten complete confirmation on their bookings, but I'm working on that.
Okay. Yeah, and that kind of is another indicator that the domestic drive market is doing pretty well. It's just the international visitation and like bus tours are what's really holding us back on the TRT side anyway. Anyway, so this graph right here is, it might be hard to see on your screen, but like I say, through June is actuals. The blue line is 2019, and the orange line is 2020. So everything from July on are just my projections, and then from June back are actuals. So you can see big dip in April. So, you know, I speculate that February through May is where we're going to lose most of our revenue for 2020. All right, so I'm going to switch back over to the revenue side, or the other. If I can find it, here we go. So we still need to close out 2019 in our main accounting software. Until we do that, I can't rev up the Cassell Advantage. And so I'm just going to be working off these spreadsheets here. This spreadsheet has 20 years of priors, but I don't know how applicable in a lot of cases going back very far would be. So starting off, we've got the first department in the general fund revenues. Well, before I move on, does anybody have any further comment on the methodology for projection?
This is Chris Kaufman. I just have a quick question about the TRT. I mean, I think that's going to be a big decision for us on what we project for 2021. And I'm wondering how much we think that domestic travel is going to make up for international travel, since, you know, people in the U.S. aren't able to travel or probably won't be traveling internationally. And to what extent did we see that trend in the Great Recession, where international travel dipped, but we made up for it in domestic travel?
Yeah, and we do have, you know, the Travel Council's budget is seriously decreased for 2020, but we still have, I think, about 400,000, maybe more than, not quite 500, between 400 and 500,000 available for advertising this year, which is a lot less, than we've had in the past. But Elaine, do you want to describe your thoughts for using that money?
Well, right now we're spending about $250,000 between September and October on drive markets, which are going to be all of Utah and all of Colorado. Because based on the statistics, and I'll have an update on Monday from Love Communications, that's what we see happening out there, that people are wanting to drive or willing to drive within a 600-mile radius of where we're located. So the focus is we're spending it with television, a little bit of television, social media, and the OTAs, online travel, like TripAdvisor and the rest. So we're going to do that. I'm trying to be very cautious about the spend, so I've only allocated the $250. We've cut out all of the print advertising that we would have done this year. I have a couple of key prints that we're going to do for next year, but we've really trimmed back. So I want to see what comes in for TRT when the state releases the funds to us, maybe next week, and see what that looks like. And we'll just move very cautiously, because obviously we want to be really prudent about what we're doing. But anything that we do is going to be focused on the drive market. I don't believe we'll be able to make up the $10 million plus from the international spend, especially, if the Canadian border still stays closed. That's obviously going to be a huge impact to us, because that's our one of our key international markets. So I think flying, we've discussed that flying is not really going to be people aren't going to do that until a year from now, late spring. We'll have a little bit of international when people feel secure, but most of it's not going to be for another year. And our big spend for the fly markets from Chicago and Austin into Denver, we do not have planned until probably next September, or August or September. So again, we're working with Love. We're looking at all the statistics. We're moving very cautiously in hopes that we'll be able to, and we can react fast, faster than prior, because we've got videos, we've got a lot of our advertising, that if the TRT that's flowing in this month and next month looks promising, then we can definitely ramp up based on those, the revenue that comes in. So right now it doesn't look like 2021 is going to be, again, a banner year for us. I think we'll be squeaking through, especially for the first 6 months. I hope I'm wrong, but that's what all indicators are.
Okay. Thanks, Lane. So yeah, I guess the gist is that we are targeting the domestic drive market with what advertising money we have. For some reason, my screen share isn't working. What do you guys see? Anything from the screen share?
I see the screen that says you've started sharing, but I don't see any actual information on there.
For some reason, it says your screen sharing is paused. How do I unpause my screen share? Not sure what the deal is with that. Stop. Is there something, did, Mallory, did my permissions to screen share get
They
paused or taken?
should not have. Let's see. I just checked. Can share. Do you want to try again? I just went in and clicked everyone can share and then unclicked, re-clicked, save.
Okay, I'm gonna try again. Still not working. All right, well, this is kind of a first. Let me Google that and see if there's a solution.
There's some kind of play and pause button at the very top or bottom of your screen. Near the little red
Oh,
thing.
no, I see it. No, there's one that says resume share, but it's not doing anything. That's weird. Hold on a second, let me just, see if I can figure out what the deal is. Maybe I need to close some screens or something.
While he's doing that, I'll just add, this is Jaylyn. I'm sure that, oh, there you are. I'll say
All
two
right.
things then.
Go ahead.
I know there's much more high-powered data than my anecdotal stuff, but as far as my B&B, it is full through the end of October. And we have people coming from New York, New England, Chicago, all over the country. So I don't know how they're getting here, if they're flying or driving that far, but there's that. And then the other thing is, Chris, I'm not sure how hard it is to email these documents. I really love to have a PDF up because I can make the print way bigger than it shows up on the little small share screen. But this is good for today. So if it's not too big of an issue, it would be great to get PDFs or whatever, Excel sheets of this stuff.
How's that? Does it look bigger now?
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I even forgot to email my own self. That's why I got to work and I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot to email myself my work. But yeah, I just finished it like at 7 o'clock last night.
Yeah, I thought that was probably the case.
But anyway, this should be more readable, hopefully. All right, so are we ready to just move into general fund revenue accounts overview? Yes?
Yes.
So this first department in the general fund revenue is mostly going to be property taxes, sales tax, aviation fuel tax, et cetera, so taxes, essentially. Chris Kaufman worked up some good projections for us, assuming a 5-year average collection rate. And Chris, did you just want to go over your rationale for using that?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
So we really don't know what the collection rate this year is going to do, but I think that it's a pretty safe assumption to say that in 2021 we are going to be somewhere pretty close to whatever the 5-year average ends up being. it's hard to know what that average is going to be without knowing exactly what happens this year, because this year will be factored in there. So there were just kind of a lot of unknowns. So I left it as is, which is what we've done in the past, not assuming that we're going to beat the collection rate that the tax rate calculation uses or go under it. So I think it's a reasonable assumption to start off with. In my projections, I simply used what we're budgeted to bring in for this year, and then we did add in. I did add in new growth to that for next year. Basically, an amount that's similar to what we got this year. I think with the amount of construction that's still going on, that's going to be in the ballpark, and that way we don't have to factor in new growth later on in our overall discussions, because it'll already be baked in to the budget, which I think is fine, and I don't think there's any issues with us doing that. We know we're going to get it. We know we're going to get some, and so I think it's a good idea to put some in there.
All right.
On the property tax.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to mention that, when we're looking at these numbers, to keep in mind that the general fund and the library, raise their property tax rates significantly for this year. So we're going to see that in our projections for 2021. They're significantly increased.
Yeah. And then, as you see later, I think our year-to-date business license revenue for business license fees is about 130% year-to-date versus 2019. So there's definitely still a lot of construction happening. Anyway, so this first, general property taxes, that's a big one. As you can see, as Chris Kaufman indicated, property taxes went up for the first time in about 13 years for general operations. And then this is Chris Kaufman's calculation with new growth included. And these other components of the property tax are, I think, likewise projected using the collection rate for the 5-year average. When we get down here, these two sales and use taxes are our main general fund sales and use taxes. And so as you can see, I just projected 100% of 2019, which I think is conservative. And, we still have a couple months to revise these as more information comes in. But at this point, I just projected 100% of 2019, which I think is attainable for the sales and use tax. If you look at, consider the prior spreadsheet that I just showed you, where our collections are already into the mid-90 percentiles in June for our comparison with 2019. So I think at this point that's a pretty conservative estimate for 2021, and it could grow. It usually on an average year, the sales and use taxes grow by about 5 to 6%, or they have in recent history. And so I wouldn't expect, we do have to realize that 2021 is a ways off from 2019. And we would typically see by 2021, a good 12% increase over 2019 if COVID hadn't come along. And so this projection is about 12% under what we normally would project for 2021. Which I think is pretty conservative. And so I guess we'll see, we can revise this as we get more information and start receiving more monthly sales tax remits. Anybody have any other suggestions or questions about that?
Chris, is there any thought to a very modest property, since we didn't raise taxes for 13 years. In any place that I've ever lived in the country, every year we had an increase in property taxes. is that something, because we don't know the unknown for 2021, is that something that we might want to consider or need to consider to keep the county afloat, since we're not, we don't know what the TRT is going to be like rolling in. So how do we shore up the general, the fund here in order to help so that we're not caught in kind of a bad situation as we move into fall of 2021?
So the advertised property tax increase for 2020 was considerably higher than what we set it at. And when we certified the 2020 tax rate back in June, I brought up the option of, that there was the option anyway of using the full advertised property tax. I think we dropped it by about 1.2 million from what we advertised. And to help with COVID, but the council and myself both, decided that would be too big a burden on property owners during a time when they were already having a hard time. So it was an intentional decision at that point in time to make up for lost revenue by making budget cuts.
Mm-hmm.
So that's I assume that that's going to carry on. I don't think that the commission would have any appetite to increase taxes for 2021. I mean, it's an option. It's always an option, but I don't think it's politically viable.
I think that said, we'll always have that on the table like we do every single year as, one of the options to present to the commission, because it's always there. But I think I would agree with Chris that I'm not sure that anything has changed enough from the last time it was discussed for them to want to increase it, but we'll certainly have it as one of the options on the table.
Yeah, and I think, we've made some really severe cuts this year, and I think that will, get us through. And so I don't think I would recommend a property tax increase either. And so I think that we'll be able to balance the budget without it. I mean, it's hard to say, we're just getting started, but typically you wouldn't even consider a property tax increase unless you went through the full budgeting process and saw that you were way in the red, and either you couldn't make cuts or whatever scenario unfolds, then you would say, all right, maybe we should consider a tax increase. But I don't think that's where we're at. I think we'll be all right with that one. And so, anyway, with the sales and use tax, I think that, like I say, starting off fairly conservatively for now. If it's looking like it's like kind of a sure thing that we'll see growth beyond the 2019 levels, we can come back and adjust that before we finish up with our tentative budget. The aviation fuel tax, I bumped that back. I mean, it's 15,000 is kind of the standard. In 2019, it was down because the airport was shut down for quite a while due to construction, and so I went back to 2018. And 15,000, 2018 closed out about 14,856, and so that seems like a pretty reasonable budget for 2021. It's not a huge amount of money, and so I don't need to spend forever trying to calculate that one, but I think that's reasonable. And let's see here. I don't have anything. Let's see, Chris, did you come up with, maybe I missed it, did you come up with a projection for the state levy? And
No,
for us, that's collecting?
No, I didn't work on the state one. I'm not even clear how much of that exactly we get back, and it's a very small amount. I think projecting whatever we got in 2019 is probably pretty reasonable.
Well, I don't think we even, well, let's see, I don't know, I think it wasn't going into that account. 2019 showed 0. So wherever it was going, it wasn't going into that account. Nothing in 2018 either, so that's kind of weird. It must have been getting accounted for differently.
Yeah, I send that money to an account at the state now. And so it doesn't get sent to the county directly from me. And so it has to come back to us from the state in some way. And I'm not sure when that happens exactly.
I gotta check on that. And so if it comes back from the state in the form of a check, it might have gotten rolled into a different property tax account.
Chris, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
So on the top line, the property tax collection, you're projecting a really large increase, like looks like about 50% compared to previous years. And I'm just looking at my property tax notice I got personally in the mail, and it shows a much smaller increase. So what accounts for that rather large increase in revenue there? Is it, because I don't think the rate went up by 50%, did it? Was it other entities or?
Kevin, are you comparing your total tax bill or your county line item?
Looks like the total tax bill, yeah. Okay, so
Right.
The line item that this one pertains to, I think, is called general operations. Is that right, Chris?
Or county general. And if you have your valuation notice from the summer, it will show that percentage increase for that one line item.
okay, you're right, thanks, sorry.
And so, yeah, this also includes new growth, which kind of comes in on top of the certified rate.
Okay, but to summarize, that county general saw a very steep increase of about 50%. But as far as the total tax bill goes, it's a much smaller increase because the other entities are not.
And I have another very complicated spreadsheet that kind of parts that all out.
Okay, thanks. Sorry to slow you guys down.
But yeah, it's substantial, and I guess that's what happens when you wait 13 years to do it. But still, you know, we're well within spec, so to speak, for what we're allowed to collect. So the rest of these are basically just other components of our property tax. We collect the maximum rate we're allowed to collect for assessing and collecting. And so that's kind of a set formula. And we, you know, Chris Kaufman projected these, and they're probably pretty good. So not a lot of magic goes into that, but here's where we get into our, the next department is licenses and permits. Business licenses are running about 86.51% year-to-date versus 2019. I don't think that has to do with COVID. It has to do with us realizing that state law precludes us from charging a fee for a business license for a home occupation as long as the business itself doesn't have a significant impact on the primary use, which is residential. And so I'd say that 14.5% drop is in relation to not charging for home occupation business licenses, and I projected that will carry on into the future. And so this particular 62,738 is 86.51% of the 2019 year-end actuals. And we're right on, you can see that I amended the 2020 budget in exactly the same way. We did that back in August. And the next one, planning and zoning fees are down for some reason. They're only running about 47.5% versus 2019. I sent an email out kind of inquiring of Mila, Janet Kyle, et cetera, some other folks about, try to get an understanding of why it's down so much, because the anecdotal reports are that they're just as busy over there as ever. And so I'm not entirely sure why we're running only 47.52%. I didn't plug anything in on that because I need to get more information to understand why it's down so much. And I might have to go in and actually look at the number of applications that have come in and compare numbers to see if it's a numbers thing or what. But there's something going on there that I don't quite understand. And so have to look into that one further. Next down, building permits. We're running about 129% versus 2019. I set the 2021 at a fairly conservative projection, which is just to match 2019. It's somewhat unpredictable, but I can check with Bill Holst and see if he can tell me what might be coming down the pipe for 2021. But I think that business licenses haven't dropped, that's for sure, and so construction is definitely exceeding 2019 levels this year. And then there's marriage licenses, 1,500 is a pretty decent average. We're running about 104%, so kind of right on track with 2019 for marriage licenses.
Hey, Chris.
Any questions? Go ahead.
Hey, this is Quinn. On the marriage licenses, I think for the fee schedule, we're going to update that and increase that significantly. We're quite a bit below the rest of the state on those. So
Okay.
Next year, I can't remember exactly. I think we're charging 25 and we may go up to 40 on that one for next year.
All right, just let me know and I'll adjust this by whatever percent you increase it. It's not going to be significant, that's a tiny little drop in the bucket.
No, it's not. But yeah,
regardless.
we're gonna try and increase that. So.
Okay. And we're going to update our fee schedule, and so I'll probably take any significant changes to our fee schedule into account as well, but we haven't done that yet, so.
Chris, this is Mallory. The deadline we gave for folks was the end of the month, so hopefully pretty quickly after that, I should be able to give you all of those increases so that you can plug those in and we can go through those here.
Great. All right, any questions with licenses and permits? All right, moving on then to our intergovernmental department for general fund revenue. Quite a few lines in here we haven't used for a long time. The first one is our Sitla mineral, sort of a mineral lease royalty type of thing, similar to the federal government, but for state lands. And in 2019, it dropped a lot, and I don't know if that's because something got miscoded or if there's been some shift in the way that they pay that out. Normally, it's about $20,000, but that's something I need to look into. Either the payment came in and it got put in the wrong spot, or it's been significantly decreased. And it's possible, I suppose, that the state has reduced their royalty rates similar to the feds. I'm not sure. I'll have to check in on that. I can check with Sitla. But something wrong with the 2019 amounts, and I need to look in that. Then we have our state payment in lieu of taxes. These are now going to be sent directly to the service districts. They won't go through Grand County because we had a little snafu this year. Because the state uses federal mineral lease money to pay their state payment in lieu of taxes, that we can't take that money into the county without it directly offsetting our federal mineral lease payment by that exact amount. And so to get around that, we don't retain it, and we never have, but we pass it through, and so it gave us problems this year, which we got resolved. But moving forward, this line item will be irrelevant, and so I zeroed it out for 2020 and 2021. And then, let's see, federal payment in lieu, Chris Kaufman is projecting, I think you said about a 2% increase, right, Chris? For 2021, and so that's 1,325,000 projected.
Yeah, that's a 5-year average of increases.
Okay, and then I'll have to adjust this at the end of the year too, because I think we brought in quite a bit more than, or not quite a bit more, but more than this for 2020. It was a little unsure exactly what was going to pan out, but this is probably a pretty good estimate. Our Division of Wildlife payment in lieu of taxes has always been the exact same amount, so $4,538. And then the next line is our state search and rescue reimbursement. This comes from those cards that people can buy. I think they're like $25, and so it usually is about $28,000 a year that we get from those, and it's obviously not much in relation to our actual expenses associated with search and rescue, but it's something. Then moving down.
Hey, Chris.
Oh, go ahead.
I can give you actual amounts for 19 and 20 if you want on federal PILT.
I think it was in your email, right?
Yeah, but it looks like 19 is maybe a projection.
Oh, okay. Let me just highlight them so that I can remember to come back and adjust. What was the 2019 actual?
1,268,212. And then 2020's is 1,294,245.
Say that one more time.
1,294,245.
All right, so something, this was the actual, something maybe was a miss. In 2019, there was something that changed. I can't remember what. So whatever the difference was in 2019 must have got accounted for in a different account. Anyway. And then this I'll have to adjust for our end of year 2020 budget adjustment. There's been some, and then next up, the State Council on Aging. This is the senior socialization grant that we have for the Grand Center. Something changed with this. I recall there's some changes with some of Verlene at the Grand Center's grants, and so I touched base with her yesterday to figure out what changes occurred. And I know we actually lost about $8,000 in grant funding this year. So I'll have to factor that in somewhere. The next line item is Sand Flats contribution to search and rescue for the search and rescue activity that goes on up there. And that is $10,000 kind of flat payment that Sand Flats makes to the general fund. Sand Flats is an enterprise fund, which means that they're somewhat independent of the rest of the county and considered business-like activity. So anytime that another fund is being served by general fund, I try to get some compensation for the general fund for those services. This hazmat grant, I need to talk with Rick Bailey or somebody. I think Rick's actually out sick, and so I don't really have, at this point in time, an update on that particular grant. So that's another one that I'll have to come back to. Then this grant is another grant for the Grand Center Senior Socialization Services. I think something might have got miscoded in 2019 because it's always 2,000 every year, and Verlene did verify that it will be 2,000 again. And state liquor allotment, 22,000 is approximately what we got in 2019, and so I just carried that across. And I can't remember exactly if that's our beer tax funding. Quinn, is that roughly, you just went through the beer tax thing, is that roughly that amount, or is it?
Yeah, I'm still compiling that. I'm about ready to send it, but it's 22,394.
Yeah. So we come up with there's a tax on beer, and we come up with a plan on spending that money for some eligible expenses, mostly programming in substance abuse programming or whatnot in the jail. And so that's where that money comes from. It's a tax on beer that comes back to us. The next line is the Department of Motor Vehicles. The assessor's office has a contract with the state of Utah to run the county's division of motor vehicles. And it's actually based on usage. And we're running about 40%, 40% year to date. And the reason for that is that the assessor's office has been sending a lot more people to the state's website, as opposed to processing here at the courthouse. And so that's why that's down. It's COVID related. So we're sitting at about 39% now, and I projected some recovery that way next year, but I kind of assume that they're probably going to continue to try to get people to renew online as much as possible, even next year. So I put it at 50% of 2019 levels, which is about 19,000. So moving on, these next three line items are related to restaurant tax and TRT taxes that we send to the general fund. So with the airport, we can use TRCC, which is car rental and restaurant taxes for airports. And so in 2019, we sent $325,000 because the airport got a stimulus grant, which could cover virtually 100% of their operational costs. I eliminated that portion of the budget for 2020. And then for 2021, depending on how much of that grant is left over, it was, I think, $1,050,000. We may not need to send a TRCC contribution to the airport next year either, but I need to talk with Andy, our airport director, to confirm, how much he thinks will be left over and whatnot. But it's possible that we won't have to, that we can use that TRCC money for something else. The old Spanish Trail Arena is the next line down. They're eligible to receive or to have their expenses offset by the restaurant tax or the mitigation side of the TRT, because they're a convention center and obviously recreationally oriented. And I generally don't calculate what that contribution is going to be until we get done projecting and working out those particular funds. The Fund 26 is our fund where we put the mitigation side of the TRT. Once we get the TRT projected, then we'll see what we have to work with, and then I come back later and plug those numbers in. The museum, we help fund using transient room taxes as well. Because the transient room tax is projected to be lower this year, we did drop the budget this year. And again, depending on what our projections for TRT are for 2021, we can potentially bump them back up to their full funding, which is about $95,000. Down here is this line right here, OSTA service special or the contribution to the Old Spanish Trail Arena from the Recreation Special Services District. Typically, they commit up to $75,000 to help offset maintenance and operations. However, the Commission recently pulled more funding from them in their district allocations, and so I haven't heard yet, but it's possible that the rec district may decrease their contribution to maintenance and operations at the arena. It ended up being about $55,000 in 2019. Right now, I've got a kind of a placeholder of $50,000 instead of $75,000, but I can fill that number in once the rec district decides what their contribution is going to be. But it may be less than it has in the past. As you're aware, potentially we used to do building inspections for both the city and the county, but the city established their own building inspection department. There was some work left over in 2019, but I don't think that, as far as I know, there's no further agreements for 2020 or 2021 for the county building department to do anything in the city, so that revenue line item has gone to zero. Next up is Moab Dispatch Services. The current, I guess you could say, agreement, I don't know if we exactly have an agreement with the city, but sort of on a handshake, they pay 1/2 of the full cost of our dispatch commander. And so that's, generally roughly about $120,000. It was a $117,000 in 2019. There's usually cost of living adjustments, et cetera, and then increases to benefits costs. But that's roughly about what the city pays for dispatch. I know that there are a formalized agreement is in the works, but I'm not quite sure how far down the road that is. Next up is the search and rescue TRT contribution and law enforcement TRT contribution. These are the two biggest contributions to the general fund from TRT. And so in 2019, we sent $198,000 for search and rescue reimbursement, and then law enforcement we sent about $2,472,000. I've dramatically reduced the projection for TRT this year. By the end of the year, it might come up more than I projected, but just to be on the safe side, we did a budget amendment and dropped these figures significantly, and so if TRT ends up looking like it's going to be, better than I projected, we can bump these up at the end of the year. But again, for 2021, we need to go through the process of projecting the TRT first before we can figure out what we can plug in here. So, this is tied to that Fund 26. And so once we get done with that, we can come back in and plug these figures in. Same sort of deal with the Grand Center. The Grand Center considered a convention and recreation facility, and so they're eligible to receive TRCC. And so part of the reason why this figure is so much greater in 2020 than it was in 2019 is because the airport's grant from the stimulus, the CARES Act stimulus, created more TRCC funding. And so instead of sending that TRCC money to the airport, I switched it over to the Grand Center. And once we project TRCC, which is actually doing considerably better than TRT right now, we'll be able to come back in and portion that out. And that's when we'll get to the point of plugging that particular number in. Expense reimbursement is kind of a little bit of a junk drawer. And so this is kind of just an average, 23,000. It's kind of not exactly projectable, but whenever we pay something out for another entity and they reimburse us, that's kind of the line item we use. It's a little bit of a miscellaneous type line item, but it relates to expense reimbursement specifically. These last three accounts were created this year, mostly for 2020, although this airport grant revenue will carry on for 3 years. So the CARES Act revenue is $1,210,000 approximately, and that's if we get all three tranches in. This is not the full grant amount. The full grant amount for the airport is, I think, $1,051,000, but it's expense reimbursed, and so I calculated the costs associated with operating the airport, plus capital expenditures, et cetera. And this is my rough projection for the airport's, what we'd be able to seek reimbursement for out of that grant. The remainder, could be paid out this year, next year, or the year after. And so whatever the remainder is that we calculate, we can add in here. But I just need to double check with Andy about how much he thinks he'll seek reimbursement. It's possible that we may want to part this out. I'm not really sure. Then that last line is our FEMA COVID revenue. I've got 35,000. Chris Kaufman, does that sound about right?
That's still pretty unclear. There's a lot more work to do on that one to figure out what we can get covered. We have to go back and look at, on a lot of the expenses that would be covered for, cleaning supplies and stuff like that. We have to prove to them now that it's an increase over what we would have spent from the prior year, and that work hasn't been done. So it's a good enough placeholder for now, I think.
Okay. All right, so that's the end of our intergovernmental department in the general fund revenue. Does anybody have any questions before we move on? Okay, moving on then to charges for services. This first one, administrative fees, as you see, it went from like $12,800 to $134,600 in 2020. And the reason for that is that I assessed how much administrative support the general fund provides to other funds like SAMFLAT, the Travel Council, Active Transportation and Trails, the Roads Department. These are all separate funds. And so the administrative side, a lot of the work that happens in the clerk's office, in terms of accounting and processing all of their expenses and revenue, plus personnel services, doing HR, payroll, that kind of stuff. So that's why it jumped up, and part of it, is a strategy to help decrease a potential property tax increase. And so that's why that jumped up, and I think it's, fair and respective to the services that are being provided to other funds from the general fund. And so I carried that same figure across. I don't expect to recalculate that, but just kind of leave it the way it was for 2020. Clerks fees right now are up 21% versus 2019, but it's not, a huge amount of money. I just carried across the average, which is about $4,500. Recording fees right now are about 92% of 2019, so relatively on track. 2019 was kind of a big year for recording fees, and I guess it's kind of hard to predict exactly how much that will be, but I stuck more with the average of 90,000, and 19, as you can see, was quite a bit above average, and I can kind of maybe do a little more projection on that based on talking with our building inspector and see, what we've got coming down the pipe in terms of what could be recorded and the fees associated. But at this point, I feel more comfortable going with just the average rather than basing off this somewhat outlier year, which is 2019.
Hey, Chris, the recording fees are set by state statute, and I know they did an adjustment on those, and I'm not sure if it took effect in 2019 or 2020, but John Cortez would know.
Oh, okay. I guess I'll check with him. Yeah, that may be, if that's the case, then we can keep it up at that same level. I'll just have to double check that. So our airport fees, right now we're running about 60% year to date on airport fees. And I'm projecting some recovery, so the way that I projected this revenue is to go 75% of 2019. I don't expect that we're going to see full recovery. We might, but this is again a conservative estimate for airport fees. There's a new line item for airport vending because the airport bought the vending machines and are running the vending machines out there, so there's a new revenue line for those vending machines, estimated to be about $2,000 a year. And then we've got plan check fees for building department doing plan review. Again, these are up year to date, about 37% increase from 2019. I kind of kept it relatively conservative. The budget is actually about that amount already higher than 2019's collections, and so if this figure holds true through into 2021, then 25,000 would be about right. We've got some minor other little revenue accounts, return check fees. I guess there's some reimbursement for drug testing that we get, I think, from the jail. Our special events fees, we're actually running about 82% year to date, which is kind of surprising, but we have processed some special events. 2019 was quite a bit above budget at 2,900. So I figure, factoring COVID in, 1,500 might be an actual decent figure. Hard to say, but it's not a lot of money, so it's not going to make a big difference. And then the DNA collections, again, reimbursement for the jail. The justice court and the jail, you know, are running kind of low. There's been some forgiveness or a change in the judge at the justice court, which is reflected in some of these. I dropped the budget down to 2019 levels, but it may even be lower than that, but it's not a significant amount of money, so I don't think it really spend too much time trying to project that. There's this line item, I can't remember exactly what it is, this transient inmate housing. I think there's some reimbursement that we occasionally get, and if we do, it's around $1,200. Our sheriff's fees are running 200% actually year to date versus 2019. I haven't really looked into that, but it varies quite a bit. 2018 was $15,785, and 2019 dropped down almost half, $8,891, and I dropped it in 2020, but it's looking like it might actually be in 2020 be more like a 2018 year. And these, I think, are the kind of fees that they charge for escort services and other things. But there's also, down the road, you'll see here, movie support, which is way down. So these sheriff's fees are based on, I think, a sergeant's pay grade plus benefits, and so we calculate an hourly rate for officers providing support for private events, and that's what that's about. I set it at $10,000 for 2021, which is probably okay. Jail fees running about 82% year to date, and so that's reflective. 2019 collections 5,400, 2021 5,000. The sheriff's services for security on movies, we're only looking about 10% year to date, so that's obviously way down due to COVID. May be the same next year, and so I dropped the 2020 and the 2021 budget down a lot, 2,500. Then we have a couple contracts with the jail for state inmates. And these are probably pretty close projections if we continue on as we have with our state inmates, and I think that we plan to. Don't see any reason why we wouldn't. Weed removal, this is where we recede in if the weed department does any work on private property. This is where the reimbursement comes in. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. We also get reimbursed for providing a bailiff to court. It's down quite a bit due to COVID at about 38%, and so I dropped it for next year as well, not really knowing when the courts are going to start, meeting in person again in the courthouse. It's all electronic now, and so I don't think you really obviously don't need a bailiff as often. Election filing fees for next year, it's a municipal year, and so, every other year we see a big filing fee on a regular election, and then during the municipal cycle, people sometimes will file for, I think, state offices. I can't remember what that small amount is, but there's usually some small amount. Any questions for our charges for services before we move on?
Yeah, Chris, I'm just wondering about the airport parking fees. They're at zero. Is that something we're figuring out later?
They've actually been, they've been getting receipted into Fund 56, which is our capital fund for the airport. And so I actually need to switch that over. So I'm going to make a note of that, just kind of highlight that. It's been going into Fund 56, but it really shouldn't. It should be going into the general fund. And so I'll have to look at that in the different fund and then carry it across, because it's not been being receipted into the general fund, even though that's where it should be going. It's not really a capital project, and so it shouldn't be going to Fund 56, which is the airport's capital fund. So that's a good catch. That's something that I need to carry across. And I did, recently have Janice start receipting those into the general fund, but it was about halfway through the year, so we're gonna have to probably do a transfer to get the whole amount over in there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right. Moving on to fines and forfeitures. Justice court fines are only running about 60% relative to 2019, and that's Matt from our chief deputy attorney explained it during a budget meeting, but that's kind of an intentional decision that the courts have made, that justice courts made. It's not really an anomaly, and so I assume if things continue on that same way into 2021, then this is a projection which is about 60% of 2019's values. And I can kind of touch base with Dana Lee about that, see if how long she thinks that these will go on. Every time we get a new justice court judge, they have a different philosophy on fines, et cetera, and so those numbers always change every time you get a new judge. And so we'll have to kind of like work with Dana Lee to try to figure out how that's going to look in the future. I think it's somewhat affected not only because of a new judge, but also because of COVID. And so the conservative estimate is that it will carry on next year the same as it is this year. And if Dana Lee gives me a different word about that, then I can change it. The rest of these are relatable again. Restitution's running about close to normal, so I left that at 25,000. Public defender recruitment's down a bit, but 7,000 is, a bit less than what we collected in 2019 anyway, so that's probably still good. Our court security surcharge is down for the same reasons, COVID related, and so I dropped that down quite a bit, kind of projecting that we might be in a similar situation next year. If that changes, we can go back and adjust it. Alcohol fines are down, so I adjusted that. We're running about 43% versus 2019 year to date. Same with our court surcharge and court security state reimbursement. And so all of our fines from court are down pretty much all across the board. So kind of plugged in fairly conservative figures. When I work with the Justice Court on their budget specific to their expense side, I can discuss these revenue figures also and come back and adjust them if need be. But right now they're based on what's happening right now. Any questions on that? Fines and forfeitures? All right. Moving on to our miscellaneous department in the general fund. First up, major losses associated in interest rates have plummeted, and so I think we went from 2.1, 2.2 down to 0.6%. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, we're down to 0.5% now, which is kind of the rock bottom that PTIF hit after the Great Recession, and it stayed there for many, many years. So who knows what'll happen going forward. The Fed has said they're planning to keep rates down through 2023. So yeah, this is going to be something we're dealing with for quite a while. In addition to the rates being down, our average balance is down a little bit too.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's all reflected in our interest. Our capital investment earnings have gone down also, are projected to go down quite a bit. We have a $2 million in a science capital investment account. That's what that is. Airport ramp fees, again, I'm projecting, some recovery. We're about 47% right now. I'm projecting we could go up to 75% in 2021. Rents and concessions are running on par. Our lease with the state of Utah is the same every year. Star Hall rent, I dropped way down for next year also, not knowing what's going to happen. It's not a significant amount of money anyway. I haven't plugged anything in for our airport leases yet. Need to talk with Andy about that because we did authorize, I'm not sure if we have, I'll have to recall, but I think that there might be some deferment enabled for airport leases, and I'll have to figure out maybe what effect that's going to have. Civic Center used to be as a Grand Center. We're only about 24% right now. I'm estimating that maybe we'll recover to be like 50% in 2019. Stall rent out of the arena, projecting some recovery there, 75% in 2019. Arena rent, again, some recovery next year, hopefully, but not full recovery. And then we've got some other smaller things here, miscellaneous revenue, kind of the junk drawer revenue. Landing fees, again, at 75%. Evaporative pond monitoring is down, and that's our, I guess you could say, like a surcharge on per barrel out at the Danish Flats and Westwater. Some other smaller things there. Insurance claim payments, 26,000 is about the average. And then this last account here is a contribution from our general fund surplus as revenue, basically pulling money out of the bank to make ends meet. And we don't figure that number until the very end after we get both revenue and expense squared away. This will include, some degree of contingency and other things built into that, but then we don't really figure that until the end. So that's it for general fund revenue accounts. Anybody have any questions or discussion?
Chris, this is Gabriel. Can you explain one more time? I just barely missed it. Where those administrative fees, where those show up?
The administrative fees are fees that that we charge to other funds. And so there's an expense side to once we get, for instance, the Sam Flats, Roads Department, any other fund there where the general fund is supporting those other funds with administrative overhead. I calculated their contribution based on number of employees and just, those kinds of things. And so there's an expense line in the other funds, and all of those expenses summed coming to the general fund are encapsulated in that administrative fees line.
Thank you.
Does that make sense? Is that what you're asking?
Yep, that does.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Comments? So that, because the general fund interacts with a lot of other funds, the full picture of our revenue isn't going to be, fleshed out until we get done projecting TRCC and TRT specifically, because those are pretty big contributions to offset general fund expenses. And so we won't really know entirely what we have to work with until we project TRCC and TRT. Shouldn't be too difficult to do that, and maybe in our next meeting, we can cover that and then fill out the rest of our general fund, the majority of our general fund revenues. Like I said, I think that it's pretty important, first off, to understand what resources we have to work with, and that can help, provide us with information about how we need to establish our expenses. And so if it's looking like we're running really lean, then we're going to want to be more, certainly pretty conservative on the expense side, trying to match the revenue. And so in government accounting and budgeting, revenue and expense have to sum to zero. And so that oftentimes means either budgeting to pull money out of the bank or to put it back in the bank for, future capital needs or whatever. But that's the goal, is to get to that zero-sum point. And so when you understand what your revenue is from the get-go, it makes it a bit easier to figure out what you need to do on the expense end. Any other questions on the general fund revenue projections? Okay, any future considerations?
Yeah, just that, and this is Gabriel again. I'm looking forward to hearing an update maybe next Friday if we have any answers about those planning and zoning fees. And also any other information you might be able to provide about the formalization of that agreement with the city with regards to dispatch command. That would be great. If there's any other info on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll talk with, I think Shan Hackwell, the jail commander, was working on the agreement, and it wasn't just going to be with the city, but also with Park Service, BLM, Forest Service, EMS, et cetera, all the entities that make use of our dispatch. And when we sum up the total costs of dispatch, all the employees, equipment, et cetera, it's way more than what we're getting reimbursed for. And so, but it's a tricky subject a little bit, just because we don't want to, drive these entities to seek dispatch services from some remote center elsewhere. And so there's got to be some negotiation associated with this. But right now, Grand County is paying for the vast majority of the cost for dispatch for everyone in the region. And then, I still don't understand the planning and zoning fees being down so much. So hopefully figure that out today sometime and report back.
Thanks much.
So I think what I'm thinking in terms of future agendas is to tackle more of the big revenues first, particularly TRCC and TRT. And so that we can fill in the big picture on some of these general fund accounts. But it also sets the stage for budgeting expenses in the travel council. And so I think in our next meeting we'll continue to tackle revenue projections, and if we have time, start getting into some expense departments. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right.
Yeah, sounds great.
Anything else?
Yeah.
Yes.
Before we?
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. This was a great overview. Thank you for all your work.
Thank you, guys. All right, let's see here. Stop share. All right, so it is 10:07 a.m. and I'm Mallory. You want to adjourn this meeting of the advisory board?
Yes, I will go ahead and stop on YouTube and stop the recording.
Okay, thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
the weekend.
Bye.